Ave Maria, and welcome to Divine Poetry, a series that explores the chronological parallels between the history of the Catholic Church and the Old Testament. If you're new to this concept, go back and watch my interview with Kevin Davis. The link is in the video description below. To make things more simple, I have divided up church history and the Old Testament into 8 color-coded time periods. Below you can see a scrolling bar with the names, dates, and the Old Testament books for each period. Use this timeline to guide you in each video. The color frame of each video will match the time period that we're discussing. Now, let's start today's episode. Hello, and welcome to episode 11 of Divine Poetry. So in today's episode, I want to take us through one of the implications, or you could say derivatives, of the fact that Catholic Church history is prefigured in the Old Testament. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a little bit. But first, I've been meaning to introduce these cartoons to you. Some of you might be aware that we also make Catholic children's cartoons, traditional Catholic cartoons. They're 100% free. If you go to our website, www.gloriousheritagecartoons.com, you can download, we have Pope St. Pius X, St. Philomena, the First Crusades, and many others as well. But also we produce Catholic children's history series as well. And again, we have those for free. You can watch them on our website. They're on YouTube as well. We have 162 topics that we're going to have when we're finished. We're currently on number 66. And a new one comes out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And we'll continue that until they're finished. I think sometime in November is when the series is scheduled to be finished. We're going to cover church history from the very start all the way up until 1945. We're not going to include the Second Vatican Council in this series. But we have everything else in it. The series is it's a color-coded thing, so what you can, if you want to as well, you can print out. We have a packet of printables. There's a timeline that you can print out, and you assemble yourself. There's cutouts. The kids can cut out, and paste certain events to the timeline so they can interact with it a little bit. The structure of the timeline, the color-coded system, does match my book. So, if you're reading Divine Poetry, you'll see that I have 8 time periods in there. And those time periods in the book, they map out onto the timeline for the children. I don't get into any parallels. It's just strictly church history. But nonetheless, the time periods of church history will match the ones from the book. What else do I have to say about that? Oh, right. Okay. So if you do want to get the download, there's a coupon code that I'll give you, and it's a CFP for Catholic Family Podcast, CFP. And if you enter that into your cart at the very end when you're checking out, you can add a coupon and enter that. It's 50% off for the packet. Again, the videos are free, but the packet, if you want to get that, you can use a coupon code for that and get 50% off. Okay, so get that out of the way. So now, today's podcast, or today's episode, is going to be about the statue dream of King Nabuchodonosor in the book of Daniel. This is fascinating because, I have my book Divine Poetry, right? And the premise is that church history is prefigured by the Old Testament in chronological order. So, for instance, as you go through King Nabuchodonosor, who I just mentioned, he is prefigured. You could say he's a prefigurement or a parallel or a foreshadowing of Napoleon or the Napoleonic era. It's a little more complicated than that, but in simple terms, that's where we're at with King Nabuchodonosor. And so, as the Old Testament progresses, all of the major empires after him have prefigurements in church history, and that's important because of this prophecy. So, the story goes, if you're not familiar with it, that Daniel, the prophet Daniel, he's in Babylon, and he is an advisor to King Nabuchodonosor, who is a pagan or Babylonian pagan, and Daniel, of course, is a Israelite from the Old Testament. And so the king has a dream, and in his dream, he is very frightened and terrified by it. He sees a statue with a golden head and a chest of silver. The statue has a midsection of bronze or brass. I think it's bronze. And then finally, there's legs of iron. And then after he sees the statue, he sees a rock that is hewn from the mountain without human hands. And the rock is hurled at the foot of the statue and smashes it to pieces. And then the rock grows into a mountain. So that's his dream. He's terrified by it. And he's trying to find someone to interpret it. Now, I'll read the prophecy to you after, but I just want to introduce the story first. So when I read it, you'll already have it in your mind, of course. Okay, so then he asks his pagan advisors. They cannot interpret the prophecy. So then Daniel is able to interpret it. And the interpretation that Daniel gives is fascinating because he lays out the kingdoms that follow Nabuchodonosor's kingdom, the kingdoms that follow the Babylonian kingdom, all the way until the time of Christ. And then the interpretation that's given by the Douay-Rheims Bible in the footnotes, I'll also read those to you as well. They spell out the fulfillment in the Old Testament with the first coming of Christ and the establishment of the Catholic Church. Okay, so now let me read you the prophecy, and then I'll go on to show how the parallels between church history and the Old Testament add a whole new dimension to this that's absolutely fascinating. Okay, here we go. I'm going to read. Now, I'm only going to read selected parts of the prophecy because it's like a whole chapter long. So I cut out some of it, but the story. First of all, I encourage you to read it for yourself so you can see that I'm not cherry picking things. But I don't want to read you the whole thing in a video when you can just read it yourself as well. Okay, I'm going to start. In the second year of the reign of Nabuchodonosor, Nabuchodonosor had a dream, and his spirit was terrified, and his dream went out of his mind. Then the king commanded to call together the diviners and the wise men and the magicians and the Chaldeans to declare to the king his dream. So they came and stood before the king. Now I'm going to skip a couple verses here because they are not able to do it. So now Daniel's going to come onto the scene, and Daniel's going to tell the king his dream. Then was the mystery revealed to Daniel by a vision in the night, and Daniel blessed the God of heaven, and speaking he said, Blessed be the name of the Lord from eternity and forevermore, for wisdom and fortitude are his. And he changeth times and ages, taketh away kingdoms, and establisheth them, giveth wisdom to the wise, and knowledge to them that have understanding. He revealeth deep and hidden things, and knoweth what is in darkness, and light is with him. To thee, O God of our fathers, I give thanks, and I praise thee, because thou hast given me wisdom and strength, and now thou hast shown me what we desired of thee, for thou hast made known to us the king's discourse. But there is a God in heaven that revealeth mysteries, who hath shown to thee, O King Nabuchodonosor, what is to come to pass in the latter times. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. Thou, O king, didst begin to think in thy bed what should come to pass hereafter, and he that revealeth mysteries show thee what shall come to pass. To me also this secret is revealed, not by any wisdom that I have, more than all men alive, but that the interpretation might be made manifest to the king, and thou mightest know the thoughts of thy mind. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, there was as it were a great statue. This statue, which was great and high, tall of stature, stood before thee, and the look thereof was terrible. The head of the statue was of fine gold, but the breast and arms of silver, and the belly and thighs of brass, and the legs of iron, the feet part of iron and part of clay. Thus thou sawest, till a stone was cut out of a mountain without hands, and it struck the statue upon the feet thereof, and there was iron that were of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of a summer's threshing floor. And they were carried away by the wind, and there was no place found for them, but the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit more here. This is the dream. We will also tell the interpretation thereof before thee, O king. Thou art the King of kings, and the God of heaven has given thee a kingdom and strength and power and glory, and all places wherein the children of men and the beasts of the field do dwell. He hath also given the birds of the air into thy hand, and hath put all things under thy power. Thou, therefore, art the head of gold. So he told Nabuchodonosor that he was the head of gold of the statue. Okay, so that's important for the understanding of the prophecy, that Nabuchodonosor was he himself was the head of gold. And after thee shall rise up another kingdom, inferior to thee, of silver, and of another third kingdom of brass, which shall also rule over the world. And then the fourth kingdom shall be of iron, as iron breaketh into pieces, and subdueth all things, so shall that break and destroy all these. Now there's some footnotes here. So the first kingdom that was mentioned after King Nabuchodonosor, so he's the head of gold. The next one after that, it says, is that of the Medes and Persians, says the footnotes. And the third kingdom, it says, which is the one of brass, is that of Alexander the Great. All right, so, and then the fourth kingdom, did I read that yet? Yes, I did, okay. In the fourth kingdom, some understand this of the successors of Alexander, the kings of Syria and Egypt, others of the Roman Empire and its civil wars. And then finally, okay, I'm going to keep on reading. There's one more paragraph left. And whereas thou sawest the feet and the toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but yet it shall take its origin from the iron, according as thou sawest the iron mixed with clay, miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part iron and part of clay, the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall be mingled indeed together with the seed of man, but they shall not stick fast one to another, as iron cannot be mixed with clay. But in the days of those kingdoms, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, and his kingdom shall never be delivered up to another people. And it shall break in pieces all, and shall consume all these kingdoms, and itself shall stand forever. According as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and broke in pieces the clay, the iron, the brass, the silver, and the gold. The great God hath shown the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is true, and the interpretation thereof is faithful. And I have one more footnote to read here. When it talks about a kingdom in verse 44, it's the kingdom of Christ in the Catholic Church, which cannot be destroyed. And that would be the kingdom that arises out of the stone that turns into a mountain. Okay, so a lot there to process. But the footnotes show us, right, that the kingdoms that are interpreted by Daniel, or by the footnotes of the Douay Rheims Bible, are the Babylonians, the head of gold, the Mede-Persians, which are silver, the brass, which is the Greeks, and the iron, which is the Romans. And then there's the toes mixed with clay and steel, or clay and iron. But then a rock's hewn out of the mountain without human hands, and it destroys the statue. And that's told to us by the footnotes to be the coming of Christ and the establishment of the Catholic Church, a kingdom that cannot be destroyed. Now, enter in the parallels between church history and the Old Testament. We have, through the series of prefigurement, a parallel for all four of those empires. We have the Nabuchodonosor is a parallel with Napoleon, and the Mede-Persians are believe it or not, are the fascists. And I can show you that. Well, first, let me go through Napoleon very quickly here. So Nabuchodonosor deposed two kings of Judah. Or I'm sorry, he took into exile two kings of Judah, and Napoleon took into exile two popes. Nabuchodonosor, he deposed the last Davidic king, and Napoleon deposed the last Holy Roman Emperor. So Nabuchodonosor was the first pagan to rule over the land of the Jews since the formation of Israel way back in the books of Judges, or with King Saul's kingdom. And similarly, Napoleon was the first pagan emperor to rule over Europe since the founding of the Holy Roman Empire by Charlemagne, and even before that. So these are very significant events, and they're not just cherry-picked details. Nabuchodonosor and Napoleon have an incredible amount of parallels between them, and even the very nature of what they did is substantially the same. Okay, now with King Cyrus, Cyrus deposes, or he conquers the Babylonian kingdom in the Old Testament. And remember, he lets the Jews go back to Jerusalem and keep it as a city-state. And so this is what happens with the fascists, with Mussolini and also Hitler as well, in part. But Europe, after the time of Napoleon, was ruled by the Napoleonic era, where secular republics were established, or the Freemasons started a Freemasonic kingdom in Italy. The next major political force to roll through Italy was the fascist political force, and that was Mussolini in Italy did the same thing that Cyrus did in the Old Testament with the Jews. He let the church have Vatican City back as a city-state. So here you have the Jews keep Jerusalem as a city-state, and then, of course, the Vatican has the same thing. And in the book, I won't go through all the details here, but in the book it does go through many more parallels than that. Okay, now moving on. Alexander the Great and the Greeks, they defeated the Persians. Alexander, of course, was the Greek king who conquered almost the whole ancient world. He ruled for 12 years. He died very suddenly. He formed a league of Greek city-states called the Hellenic League that was formed to defeat the Persians. And then, of course, when he died suddenly, his empire was carved up into 4 pieces. Now, in our time, in church history, the fascists were defeated by the Allied nations, and the parallels between Alexander the Great and Franklin Roosevelt are astonishing. He was president for 12 years. He also formed a league as well, the Allied Nations, or the United Nations, and he formed them to defeat the Nazis, just like Alexander did with the Persians. Upon his sudden death, Germany was divided up into 4 parts. And in both instances, in the Old Testament, after the division of Alexander's kingdom, 2 of those 4 divisions became like Cold War combatants in an Old Testament sense. You had the Ptolemaics and the Seleucids, and they fought over, a lot of the fighting was over the territory of Jerusalem and Judea. And similarly, we have in church history, after the division of Germany into 4 parts, it's the onset of the Cold War between NATO or the America-backed NATO and the Soviet Union. And there was that, of course, the Iron Curtain was drawn right down the middle of Europe. So just as the Ptolemaics and Seleucids fought for Judea, the Cold War in our time fought for Europe, but also for Italy in particular. So Judea is like a new Italy. No, Italy is like a new Judea. They both are home to the holy city, to the king of the covenant, which would be the high priest or the Davidic king in the Old Testament, which is the papacy in our time. But Italy was a battleground for the Cold War, especially right after World War II. They had the pivotal elections of 1948, where the question was it going to fall on the communist side or on the democratic NATO side? I won't belabor those parallels very much. They're all in the book. But anyway, now, the 4th kingdom that was mentioned in Daniel's time were the Romans. And the Romans came and swallowed up all of the land that was formerly conquered by Alexander the Great. So the Seleucid and the Ptolemaic empires both got absorbed into the Roman Empire, and the Romans ruled everything. And that's why they are described as iron. They were very strong, and they were a very strong empire, and they were hard. In our time, the next political system in Europe to arise after the Cold War was the European Union, and that came in 1991. I think it was the Maastricht Treaty, which was signed. And the European Union has been growing and growing, just like the Roman Empire grew as well. They've been growing and swallowing up all the former territories of the Cold War. All of Western Europe and most of Eastern, or a substantial part of Eastern Europe as well. So, I guess I'll let you draw the implication yourself. It's hard to miss, right? Because if church history is paralleling the Old Testament in chronological order, and if we're given a prophecy that Daniel interprets, and then the Dewey-Reams Bible footnotes interpret for us as well, about what that means in the Old Testament, referring to the first coming of Christ and the establishment of the Catholic Church, then the implications for the parallels in church history are very striking and in my mind, very convincing. It's very simple. The parallels themselves are very simple. It's not very complicated. And the interpretation is not some kind of Protestant far-flung kind of thing. It's based on something that's Catholic, and again, it's very simple. So I'll just leave it at that. I won't even personally get into what I think it means, because I think I don't even need to. Okay, so I have a lot more of these derivatives and implications of the parallels. The book of Daniel is filled with them. So perhaps if this video is well received, I will go in and do another one of those in the next episode. If not, though, I can always go back and just cover the content of the book itself, which is filled with amazing parallels in and of themselves. Okay, I'll leave it at that. You have a great week. Glory be to God, and Ave Maria.